thermostat adapter housing. Basically what this does is it allows you to use this radiator hose. The thermostat housing is actually pointing that way. On the kit, they want it pointing that way. So this is going to change the thermostat in a different direction so that you can put the hose this way, because the one from the factory, you would just cut off this part of it and it goes in right there. So at least they've got a good brand, Gates. Gates has been around for eons and they do good work, so at least they've got that. So I'm going to get started on this part next. They snuck in a idler pulley in this box, so be careful you don't lose this. You're going to need it when you do the belt later. So the kit also comes with a new thermostat housing. And literally the only difference it looks like is that this bleed screw is on the top. So this is the way it looks from the factory. The bleed screw would be on the bottom. So they just flip it over. This is one of the nicer setups. They've got a nice little hose right here that lets you drain the coolant. There's a little valve right there. Just unscrew it and let some coolant drain out. I'm letting some of the coolant drain out so that I can get the coolant level below this thing so I don't make a big mess whenever I'm doing this adapter housing. That worked really, really well. Whenever I pulled this hose and this hose off, I just got a little tiny trickle on the floor. So I've got about a tablespoon on the floor, so that worked out nice. I'm happy about that. Now I get this thing off of here. While I'm in here, I'm going to go ahead and remove the serpentine belt. Also, they give you a new serpentine belt and you've got to route it differently. So for sure this is coming off. Oh, that sucks. RIPPS. Oh, man. The factory one has a rubber gasket, and they make you put that spoogey stuff, Permatex, in there. That sucks. I'd much rather have a gasket like this. And, you know, if you're going to go through all the effort to machine this fancy custom piece, it's nothing to machine a lip in there, and then you can just reuse this gasket. I hate this stuff because you have to get everything lined up just perfect and then stick it and you get one shot. So I put a couple bolts of those little rubber centering things in there. Now I'm just going to drive it home. Got my inch-pound wrench set to equivalent of 12 foot-pounds or 144 inch-pounds. New housing, old bolts. Alright, so the next thing is to remove the idler pulley that's on it from the factory. So apparently this new idler pulley does not replace the old idler pulley. It actually goes right up here next to the thermostat housing. And then it appears this double-sided stud with this spacer goes and replaces the idler. I'm trying to get a sense of how this thing is going to fit in here because the instructions, it's like, hey, remove these two bolts, and then bang, the supercharger's on. It's like, what? Let's look at the instructions, shall we? So, take off the belt, great. Remove these two bolts, great. Put that thing on. Put that thing on there. I don't know what this means. I guess the supercharger bolts to these two brackets. And then, next page, space out your radiator, okay. Cut these two fans. Oh, it's on! You left out a few steps, buddy. After some finagling and test fitting, you have to pull this thing, your radiator, really far forward, which means these hoses over here have to be tilted down. And then you do have to take this thing off and cut a notch in it because this is the hat for the supercharger. That's your air intake. And it has to go right there. And there's literally no room for it. It's like this far away from the plastic. So you have to cut enough to clear this. the instructions show you where to cut and how to cut, and they've got a little template here on the last page for you to use. We've got the core support trimmed. You basically have to trim out this whole piece right here, and then all of these little cross braces. And I actually hit it with a little bit of white paint just so it doesn't look so hacked up. And then whenever you put the hat on the supercharger for the intake, because the intake's going to go that way over here, it actually hits the cooling fan right here, even whenever you tilt it all the way forward. So I'm going to have to trim just a little bit out of those little support fans to get it to clear just right. So I've pulled it in and out and test fit it several different times, and I think everything is where it needs to be now. These are your two 16mm bolts that the main bracket goes to. That stud goes in the bottom. I'll show that here in a minute. Got a cutout underneath there. You have to cut these fan blades just a little bit to get it to clear. It's actually going to go up a little bit like that so that it's not touching, but under the weight it kind of moves around. So I've got all my test fitting done. I think I'm ready to just start bolting it all together now. Here we go. So now I'm trying to move on to the intercooler piping, the charge piping, and you know, the piping goes, the instructions first of all are just atrocious. They don't even show the bypass valve. So it goes from the throttle body down here, and there's a J-shaped pipe that connects to right here, and then it goes around. The instructions show this view right here. That's all you get. And then they show this view right here with the bumper and everything, so you can't even really see. And I started out by trying to connect this pipe to the outlet of the supercharger, and that just wasn't working. There was no way that was going to work, and I'm like, man. So I grabbed the other piping and I came over here and I'm like, okay, well, let's see if I can figure this out. And it didn't work over here. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. So then I tried it over there and it actually kind of fits. My big concern is that this bypass valve is rubbing everything in its mother. I mean, it's hitting right here. It's rubbing everything. That will definitely rub a hole through those lines. So I've got to figure out how to like support this so that it doesn't bump into things. And then the other thing, this part right here works okay. Not the best in the world, but it works okay. Over here, however, there's a 90 that comes off of the charge side of the supercharger and goes to this kind of S-shaped pipe. Drops down here through where the factory airbox goes, but then the piping is not even close to the right size. And it's not like there's room for adjustment. I can't move, I mean, I can move the intercooler a little bit, but I can't move the intercooler that much. And I can't, it doesn't go anywhere else. Like there's just not a good option here. The only thing I can do is cut this pipe a couple of inches shorter to get these to actually line up so that it'll fit. There's just no other options. So far, this charge piping is kind of a joke. Hate to say that because it's, you know, some of the things about the kit are great, some of the things suck, but that is for sure a huge issue. So I'm just gonna have to, I think I'm gonna sort this issue out first, get this to work, and then figure out what to do about a bracket for over here to support this, and then go from there. Here's a little bit of a better shot so you can see exactly how far. I mean, that pipe is 4 inches too long, I guess. So what I'm gonna have to do is cut it right here and then re-bevel the pipe to get it to fit right. I think I have all the issues sorted out, so I've got all of the charge piping plumbed in all the way around, just kind of mocked up. I have to take it back apart and fix a few things, but over here, to fix this, what I ended up doing is making this bracket right here, tying down to one of the bolts to the alternator, and then tying into the bypass valve. So now it's not touching any of these lines. It's not rubbing up against the fuse box. It's not hitting on the valve cover. And with all of the clamps tight, it's okay. I'm comfortable with that. If it does vibrate, it's going to bump into that, but I'm not too worried. Those should be fine. The one thing that I am a little concerned about is this jiggles a lot. So the whole time you're going down the road hitting bumps, this is going to be jiggling. So I'm going to try to tie it up here to this bracket just to hold it to keep it from jiggling as much. The other thing I had to do was cut this much off of that pipe. So now everything fits pretty good right here. It is hitting right here, so what I'm going to do is just take my angle grinder and cut about a 1/2 inch off. That's no longer support for anything. The bumper used to bolt right there, but now the bumper is going to bolt here. So this is no longer support for anything. So that's going to get whacked off right there to give this some clearance so don't rub a hole in the pipe. And then through here, it actually rests right here. So once you tighten all the pipes, it actually rests right there. And the engine is actually going to vibrate. And so I don't want it to rub a hole in this pipe. So I got me some sheet metal screws and some really thick hydraulic hose and screwed down right there to give it some padding so that it doesn't rub through that. Other than that, some little things, nothing too bad. So now I've got to take it apart. I'm going to paint that bracket. I'm going to find some way to fasten that in there. And then I've got to bead roll this right here to give it something to bite into. And then should be ready to throw back together. So the next thing I'm going to install is this oil catch can. It's actually super nice. I'm very impressed with it. First thing you got to do is tap into the PVC system in the car. And this hose right here is what you're tapping into. It's right back here on the intake manifold. And it took some finagling to get this thing loose. And then you've got to put in this check valve that only works in one direction so that you don't get boost into your crankcase, but you can still vent the fumes from your catch can. So get that installed and I'll show you guys what it looks like. Okay, so I got everything tidied up, buttoned up. Now it's time to start putting the bumper cover and all that kind of stuff back on. So I've got the catch can in there, routed over. The PVC line over there, that it comes with a check valve, but the hose that it came with was too short. So I actually had to use the original hose. Got the boost reference tied in. The line runs over here, but I have it zip tied out of the way so that it's not right over the top of the exhaust manifold. Comes down underneath there and ties into the bypass valve. Got the air filter in there, got that all done. So got all the intercooler piping all fastened down. Got this little deal cut off so that there's plenty of clearance now. Got all the intercooler and everything tightened down, so now it's just a matter of putting everything back together. another gaping hole in the instructions. So this is the shroud that goes over the radiator like this to help direct air into the radiator. Well, it does not even come close to fitting because you have to lean the radiator forward so that the supercharger intake has a place to go. So I ended up having to cut out a whole lot of this just to get it to fit right. I mean, probably that much. I mean, I had to cut out tons of stuff from up here, 3 or 4 inches. I had to cut out a ton of this to get it to fit, which I don't think you'll be able to see in the long run. But they give you a template in the instructions for this part, but they don't give you templates or even warn you about the rest of the stuff. The other thing the instructions don't warn you about is this thing is not going to fit. It's either not used in the instructions or you've got to cut 3 or 4 inches off of the entire nose of this thing. And there is there's like a horn that goes right here that tucks into this part of it, and they warn you in the instructions that that part of it's not going to be reused, but they say nothing about not reusing this. So I haven't decided what I'm going to do. It wasn't until I took everything out of the bumper and tried to test fit the bumper that I was like, okay, if I have nothing in the bumper, none of this other plastic stuff, then the bumper fits. So here's the modifications you have to do to get the bumper to fit at all. So this is a V6 version, so there's no scoops or anything. So there's these little plastic things that block off this side of the radiator. Well, it's just dead space. Well, the charge pipes come right here, and they cut into this part right here. So rather than I'm struggling because if I just cut all of this right here to make room for the charge piping, there's no strength left in this thing. So it's there. There's no reason for it to be there. Same thing on this side. So I'm leaning toward just leaving them off. If I go through and cut this out right here, there's no strength. Then all it's doing is just blocking off part of the grill. So I'm struggling trying to figure out how to get this bumper back together, and the instructions say nothing about this. The bumper, I decided that little plastic guard that goes underneath there, I decided just to leave it off. There was no way I could trim it and it still be structurally any good because of the way the kit is. I decided to leave these little guards in here, guards or whatever you want to call them, blockers. I noticed that there was a straight path to the fender, the inner fender liner, this plastic thing that you have to take out. There's a straight path to that thing, and I really didn't want it to like flap in the wind or whatever, so I trimmed a whole lot of it off to get it to fit. So really it's just there so that you can't see straight through. So there's the intercooler, and then one last housekeeping thing is the drain for the supercharger. I routed it from the supercharger and zip tied it to the fan blades. There's actually already a hole in the frame right here, and that hole is in the splash guard, and it's also in the dust cover. So that's gonna be pretty cool because they're gonna have to take this down anytime they do an oil change, and basically anytime you do an oil change, you're supposed to also do a change on this supercharger. I think it's like every 10,000 miles or something. I also changed the oil in this because the RIPPS instructions are pretty adamant about the type of oil to use. He's got it in big red text, no 0Ws, and they want 540 in there, so the oil in this is questionable at best, so I decided go ahead and spend the $50 and do a fresh oil change. The other thing that's pretty cool, is the headlight actually just has this little plastic cap in here that pops out. And you can see it's a straight shot to the air filter. So we'll see what the customer thinks about that. But, you know, pop that out. Now it's kind of like, what do you call them? The Demon, where they have the missing headlights. So just about to wrap it up, torque the wheels down, and then we're waiting. Actually waiting on the computer. The customer bought a brand new computer that's already decrypted so that I can tune it. I'm waiting to gap the spark plugs and put the injectors in until the computer gets here. UPS lost the package. So we're just waiting for the computer to get here. When the computer gets here, that's when I'll put it on the dyno and finish up the tune, and we'll see what kind of numbers it makes. Hopefully that comes in the next day or two. The customer paid for overnight shipping to get it here as soon as possible. That was 2 days ago, and we still haven't got it, so we'll just see what happens on that. Here's the finished product. Got everything installed. Everything is finished. Got the RIPPS catch can, charge piping, blow-off valve, bypass valve, whatever you want to call it. We got the supercharger installed, intake, got the new thermostat housing and everything in there. Everything is pretty much ready to go. Now we're just waiting on the computer, and we'll get this thing on the dyno to get some numbers.